Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of the inaugural installment of our Conversations Confronting COVID-19 series. We will be featuring the work of Queen's students, researchers, and alumni leaders on issues that matter to all of us as global citizens. My name is Karen Bertrand. I am the Vice Principal Advancement here at Queen's and a proud Arts I-94 grad, and I will be your host for the next hour. Today, our topic is innovation pivots. We are going to explore how the Queen's community has innovatively pivoted its activities to confront the COVID-19 pandemic. I should let you know that we will be recording this event and it will be available to view online in the coming days. And there will be an opportunity for questions and answers later in the program. So if you have some questions, please do share them by clicking on the Q&A icon in the webinar control. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Jim Banting graduated from Queen's in 1993 with an honors degree in life sciences. He went on to earn his doctorate in pharmacology at Queen's in 1997. Jim's career began as a co-founder of a Queen's spin-off company that was funded by venture capitalists. In 2017, Jim returned to Queen's as Assistant Vice Principal, Partnerships and Innovation, and he has been with the Office of Partnerships and Innovation ever since. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jim Banting.
Great. Thank you, Karen, and welcome to everybody online. We appreciate you taking the time to join this online event. As Karen mentioned, I'm a proud twice Queen's graduate. I work at the Office of Partnerships and Innovation, where we're focused on working with faculty, staff, students, community members, together with local, regional, and other partners to support research and innovation at Queen's. So it's a distinct honor to be here moderating this event about research and innovation and the pivots that have happened with the COVID-19 situation. Our office reports into the VP Research, where we have a mandate to be an essential catalyst for advancing research, knowledge mobilization, strengthen Queen's local, national, and global impact. I don't think any of us could have imagined 5 or 6 months ago that we'd be sitting here today with the backdrop of COVID-19 and all of its global impacts from a public health perspective. So you can imagine fulfilling this mandate with that backdrop has been interesting to say the least, and a new normal. And this event is really about talking about how groups have come together to pivot and use research and other expertise to respond to this crisis. As one example, the VP Research Office has launched an internal funding opportunity to fund research projects that will contribute to urgent efforts to accelerate the development, testing, and implementation of medical or social countermeasures to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 and its negative consequences on people and society in communities in Canada, both nationally and internationally. You may be asking how research and innovation have been impacted by the pandemic, and I would say there's 3 sub-themes that we'll explore throughout the 3 groups that have been given us some time today to talk about their projects. The first one is embracing remote working. I would say in the academy, as well as all the support functions at Queen's for research and innovations, transitioned almost overnight and almost seamlessly to remote working. So technologies like Zoom and video conferencing. I can say that demand for support and services of research innovation is just as robust, if not more so, than prior to the pandemic. Second is the ability to pivot quickly. In the startup world, pivot is all about changing your product or service in response to market conditions. We've had a clear change in the landscape for our mandates and backdrops. And the last important piece is teamwork, groups coming together to address these challenges. As we move forward with the agenda today, I'd like to personally say just how awestruck I've been at the general outreach and desire for the Queen's community to lend a hand, to volunteer, to use resources, to mobilize expertise, to come together to support projects that would help address this global pandemic, largely to try and address the issues associated with frontline workers, healthcare workers and others, to ensure that adequate supplies and resources are available for these folks working on the front lines to help us get through this crisis. We'd like to send heartfelt thanks from Queen's to anybody in the community, in the Queen's networks that have lent a hand in any way, shape, or form. It's not possible to acknowledge the many, many people that have been involved in many, many different projects. We're here to talk about 3 of them today, but we'd like to extend on behalf of Queens our heartfelt thanks to anybody that's leaned in to provide support during the pandemic. Today, we're going to be hearing from members of Queens and higher education communities that have pivoted their programs to provide support to the COVID-19 issues directly. So at this portion of the agenda, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and as I do, maybe they can turn on their video and give a wave. First up, I'm very pleased to be introducing Dr. Tony Noble. He's a professor of physics, engineering physics, and astronomy, and scientific director at the Arthur B. McDonald Canadian Astroparticle Physics Research Institute here at Queen's. Tony's here representing the Mechanical Ventilator Milano Initiative, an international project aims at developing a low-cost, easy-to-build ventilator to treat COVID-19. Tony? Thank you for being here. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Leslie Sikipa, MasterCard Foundation Scholar from the University of Toronto, and a participant in the Dun&Deshpandy Queen's Innovation Center Spread Innovation Challenge happening over the summer. Leslie's participating in that program together with 150 innovators across the globe to tackle pressing challenges presented by COVID-19. Today, she'll speak to us about the SOAP 237 project she and her team have activated in Cameroon. I'm also pleased to introduce, so Leslie, welcome. Miss Emily Albright, next I'm pleased to introduce Miss Emily Albright, PhD candidate, Department of Chemistry, Queen's University, and Dr. Richard Oleschuk, professor and department head of chemistry here at Queen's. Emily and Richard are representing the hand sanitizer initiative that mobilized Queen's researchers and industry partners to support Kingston Health Sciences. Welcome to Emily and Richard. Thank you to the panelists for being here. I think this is going to be an informative and lively discussion. We're going to chat with each of you about your projects with some time for Q&A, both after your session and a general Q&A session at the end of the 3 talks. So if attendees have any questions, please use the Q&A chat to post your questions. So now I'd like to start with the Mechanical Ventilator Milano Initiative. This has been an international project that's garnered significant national and international media attention over the last few months. Tony, could you kick us off by giving us an overview of this project?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, thank you, Karen and Jim, and to Queen's for hosting this event and giving us an opportunity to speak about the MVM ventilator program. I should say right off the bat that I'm speaking on behalf of literally hundreds of scientists, engineers, technicians, students, and medical practitioners from all around the world that came together to work on this project. So our project really had its genesis in northern Italy, and I think you'll all remember the horrific images from that very hard-hit area of COVID-19, where the number of deaths was absolutely extreme. And a colleague of ours, Christiano Adi, also an astroparticle physicist, was actually locked down in the area, that's his home area, at the time, and recognized both the need for ventilators and the fact that within our community we had the skills to design and build things of that nature. But obviously he couldn't do it alone. And one of his first phone calls was actually to Art McDonald in Canada and at Queen's, looking for support on a project to develop ventilators. And Art then quickly reached out to the national labs across Canada to start building up a network of expertise and to build the credibility of the project. And through that process, got the McDonald Institute, Snow Lab, Triumph, the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, all behind this project. So we set out to build a ventilator, and I'm actually going to share just a couple of slides here, just to give you a feeling for how a ventilator works. And maybe someone can tell me if that is visible. I hope so. So what we wanted to do was build something that was moderately cost effective, that was well controlled because we don't want to damage the patient, easy to operate, and that we could produce quickly because we're in a pandemic on a large scale, and that meant from readily available parts. So the basic principle is pretty simple. You want to push oxygen into the lungs, and so you, oops, this is not working. Let me get it into this mode. So you push oxygen into the lungs. That's pretty straightforward. You open the valve, then you open the other valve, and on the expiration, you get rid of the carbon dioxide that's produced. So from very basic principles, that's all you want to do is introduce oxygen into the lungs in a controlled way. Of course, it's a lot more complicated. You have to have a computer controller that is controlling those valves to exquisite precision because you cannot damage the patient. You need to get the profile exactly correct. And so you do that by measuring the pressures at various places inside the ventilator. We measure the flow so we know exactly how much oxygen they're getting, and it's important to get the timing of all that right. We need to know how much oxygen they're getting, so that's monitored by a computer. And we have to prevent, accidents. So if there are high pressures or blockages and things, which can happen because these are attached to humans with mucus and so on, we need to be able to control and handle all of that. And then we add a supervisor in case anything goes wrong with the controller. The supervisor can take over and put things into a safe state so the patient's health is always protected. And then the ability to raise alarms and so on. So when you start out from base principles, it sounds very easy. The actual device ends up being a fair bit more complicated. But we've now gone through the exercise. We have built a number of prototypes, and as we speak, the real ventilators are being built by JMP Solutions and Vexos in Canada. These are the first ones that have a real contract with the Government of Canada. We're still working towards the final Health Canada certification. That's hopefully within a couple of weeks. Already real devices have been built, and we're now at the phase of testing those devices as they come off the production line at the manufacturers in Canada. And our goal is to be able to ramp up to about 1,000 ventilators a week by midsummer, when that will be the height of the production. And altogether, we're going to be providing 10,000 ventilators through a contract with Health Canada. So that's in a nutshell where we are at the moment.
Well, thank you, Tony. Amazing initiative. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. So first off, maybe the logical question, why were a group of astroparticle physicists well positioned to take on this challenge of designing a ventilator?
Well, we already work in large international groups, and that was certainly an advantage because we could be working in Italy, be working on the east coast of Canada, be working on the west coast, and so we were able to continuously cycle around and have more or less 24 hours of continuous activity picking up from the last group and so on. Because we work in large international groups, remote connections was straightforward. We already worked that way. And because of our connections to the national labs, who are generally part of these big international projects, we had the connections already built. And if you like, the scientific results that had come out from some of the projects we've worked on have been world leading, which has built the credibility of the team. And so that enabled us to have the discussions that we needed to have to develop the credibility, to open doors, to be able to have discussions with agencies, to derive potential funds and so on. So, we certainly had the technical skills in terms of the physicists and the engineers. This sort of thing is the thing we build all the time, except of course we're not medical clinicians. We don't understand anything about the medical needs, and so but by having a large group that was well connected, we could also bring in all the medical practitioners to join the group, the respiratory therapists and so on. So we were able to expand the group rather quickly and enable us to proceed safely with all the right expertise around the table, I would say.
You mentioned that it was a large group of folks. Could you give us an idea of the size of the team? How many people ended up being on the broader collaboration team?
Well, the people have come and gone as they're through the different phases, but I would say you could probably count about 400 people that have been involved in some way.
Wow, that is an amazing number of people to rally together. A couple of questions in the design considerations. Did the team need to think about the supply chain and the parts? Did you need to come together with a design that could work with things that were easily accessible, or did you need to come up with some new technologies that might be 3D printed or otherwise to create this?
Well, we are trying to rely on existing devices and existing components. For the prototyping, we did 3D print a number of things, but for the final ones, we really want, we're building 10,000 of these, and all of the components have to have appropriate medical certification. The process for getting medical certification is long and arduous, and so we really want to use components that are already recognized to be safe. The final product, of course, still has to have the overall system be tested, but the individual components as well have to be safe. So supply chain was a big problem because everybody around the world reacted in the same way. And suddenly every country is trying to build 10,000 of these devices. And a lot of them, well, there was an enormous outpouring of enthusiasm to contribute to this effort, but it also led to some difficulties in the sense that not everybody was going to be successful on every project in every country. And the tying up of components by people putting in orders before they necessarily had a product was a difficulty. We know that there were stress points at borders where protectionism to keep components within that country to protect their citizens was a potential problem, and so on. So all of that had to be navigated, but fortunately the manufacturing companies, Alamaster in Italy and Vexels and JMP, have huge production line, people who do procurement who really worked very hard on that particular piece for us.
That's amazing, Tony. Thank you so much for sharing some insights in the project. I'm struck by just when you say 400 people at various times in the collaboration, that's amazing international group of folks that have band together to respond to the crisis. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. And at the end, there'll be more time for questions as part of the general discussion. So thank you, Tony.
Yes, thank you.
So next, we'd like to move on to talk to Leslie Sakipa. A special welcome, who's a MasterCard scholar at the University of Toronto from Cameroon. She's, as I mentioned, participating in the Dun&Dishbandi Queen's Innovation Spread Innovation Challenge. Leslie, could you give us an overview of the challenge that the DDQIC group is running this summer, and in particular, the SOAP 237 project that you're working on?
Of course. So as you mentioned in my introduction, I am a MasterCard Foundation scholar, and I think it's kind of important to kind of highlight that because the MasterCard Foundation Scholarship is basically a scholarship program for students who are originally from African countries, and it's to help us pursue our education and also in the process basically provide us with tools as well as skills that can make us tomorrow's leaders and really those who are going to address tomorrow's issues. And I think it's so important to mention that because the DDQIC Spread Innovation Challenge is kind of has the same goal in the sense that throughout this summer, it recruits innovators, not just from Kingston, not just from Canada, but other parts of the world, as we have people from Nigeria and Uganda. And these innovators all come to work on COVID-19 related initiatives. And this could be businesses or social ventures like mine. And throughout the summer, we attend boot camps, intensive ones to be more specific, speaker sessions. And the whole goal of that is basically to provide us with all the tools that we would need as we are working on our ventures. And it's also great that we have access to mentors who are basically there to answer our questions. And at the end of the day, basically help us take our ventures to the next level. And another cool thing about this Spread Innovation Challenge, which I think is essential to mention, is the fact that we also do have access to seed funding, which is pretty cool, I would say. And now moving to my project, which is called SOAP for 237. So 237 is basically the country code, Cameroon's country code. So the project all started when COVID-19 really started spreading to the African continent. And me being African, as well as some of my team members, and we have a very diverse team, some are Cameroonian, some aren't. But we knew that with our experience with Cameroon, we knew that it would be hit really hard by this pandemic. And from talking with families, talking with friends, we noticed there was like a big trend of misinformation around COVID-19. So that's kind of what got us started. And especially knowing that the country could not really handle that, as many other countries as well, to be honest, knowing how it would affect the country, and added to that the level of misinformation around COVID-19, we knew we really wanted to do something about it. So that's kind of how we started and decided to use soap distribution as a means of providing that information to people in Cameroon. So that's just a brief overview. And in the process, we also do have a website where we post some of that information as well, because we really want to spread that information to as many people as possible.
Well, thank you for the overview, a great initiative. Why did you select SOAP as the vehicle to support and educate the communities you've identified?
Well, we chose SOAP because, well, a way of protecting ourselves against COVID-19 is, of course, hand washing. So the initial idea was to really encourage people to wash their hands using soap. And I would say in Cameroon, soap isn't the most expensive thing, but it's not also the cheapest thing either. So that's kind of how we went about it. And also, people wouldn't necessarily decide to reserve a bar of soaps just for the purpose of hand washing. So by providing that soap, we are kind of aiming at encouraging that behavior.
Wonderful. And how is the soap sourced, and how are you distributing it?
So we kind of have this nice process in place. So basically, we have a lot of team members in Cameroon without whom we wouldn't be able to do a lot of this work. So we basically reach out to our team members. So, okay, just as a bit of background, Cameroon, usually cities or places are divided in neighborhoods, right? And all these neighborhoods have neighborhood leaders, whom we call quarter heads. So we reach out to one of our team members who is in Cameroon, and the team member reached out to the quarter head saying, hey, we are doing this initiative where we want to provide you with soap and information so you can help distribute in your neighborhood specifically. So along with our team member and the neighborhood leader, they go ahead and distribute the soap. So it basically starts from we connect with our team member connects with the neighborhood leader, and with the neighborhood leader, they distribute the soap. And the soap is sourced from local women producers. With all these crises, we really knew many businesses would be affected, especially local businesses. So we really wanted to give back to these women who are making soap in Cameroon. So we buy the soap from them and provide it to the neighborhood leader. And in the long run, we are also kind of aiming at making some sort of videos to also teach people how to make their own soap, just, in case there's like a second wave of the virus. And as well, soap can be a great source of income for some people as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry, the video was cutting out there for a second. Are you using any particular types of technology? Like, are you distributing the messaging using digital? Is it paper posters or flyers, or is it these folks you have in the local communities sharing your message?
So it's both. Those in the local communities, preferably paper information, or just spoken as well, because we really just want to send out the very basic information, like wash your hands, social distance, very key information. So it's a lot of oral, but also paper. And that's also why we have a website where we want to refer people to, just where we have a lot more resources for anyone who's interested in that. But specifically, these resources are targeted to the Cameroonian population. Like the kind of resources we have is really related to Cameroon in a way, or applicable to Cameroonian context.
And what's the initial response been as you're starting to roll out this project?
Well, we've had pretty positive responses so far, which
Nice.
is really encouraging. We've had even people in the diaspora who heard about our project are really pushing it forward, and even people whom we are giving the soap to have really seem to be appreciating the initiative, and that's how the word has been really spreading around. And I would say it's been pretty positive. We do have some bumps and challenges, but overall, people have been very receptive.
Excellent. So you mentioned some bumps and challenges. Could you give us some examples of the challenges and obstacles you've overcome in the project so far?
I would say one of the main challenges we faced was just having to do this communication online, communicate with our team members in Cameroon. So this whole, of course, there's no way we could do that in person, but doing this virtually was a bit of a hustle, especially at the start, in terms of coordinating meetings, in terms of the internet connection, which is not always the most stable, and yeah, that was a bit of a bump. But we are really trying to get through that, and one way we do that is by trying to have both synchronous and asynchronous meetings. So we do have like a WhatsApp group chat where we are always connecting with our team members on a daily basis, and we try to set up at least meetings once a week where it's either through Zoom. If Zoom doesn't work, we move to Skype. If Skype doesn't work, WhatsApp chat, and sometimes we would have a Zoom call with someone on the WhatsApp call listening in. So we really try to be as flexible as possible, because doing it online is a bit challenging, I would say.
Yeah, well, I think one of the themes for the session today is all about pivoting. So it seems like you pivot from different technologies to make sure your groups will stay in contact. So one last question. What have you learned that you hadn't expected to learn, or that was a bit surprising to you as part of this project? Can you give us an example?
As part of the SOAP project?
Yes.
I was well, I'm not sure it was really surprising, but it's really this power of collaboration, because as Tony mentioned, how, like in their case, for example, how they've been all over the, people from all over the world are working on this together. And even in my case, like this collaboration is so essential, has been so, and I knew before that, yes, collaboration is cool, but I've never really lived the impact myself. So that's the main thing that I've learned throughout this whole journey, and that I keep learning, and it's really great.
Okay. Well, a great example of an important social innovation project. Thanks so much for sharing it with us. And we'll leave some time at the end, as I say, for general questions of the panelists. But Leslie, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome.
Now let's move on to our third group. So again, welcome Emily and Richard for participating. Thank you for hopping on the call and joining us. Emily and Richard, could you give us an overview of the hand sanitizer initiative?
Sure. I guess I want to thank Jim and Kim also for asking us to talk to you today, and also because it's fun to be able to highlight something that a real team put together. So Emily and I are here as representatives of the team, but similar to what Tony said, that there's umpteen people that were involved on this project to actually make it go. And so I guess maybe to start things off, we received a communication from the head of surgery on March 18th that said that the Kingston General Hospital was in dire need of hand sanitizer. And so we certainly saw from Leslie that talks about how hygiene and hand washing and sanitization are really, really important. In a hospital setting, if they don't have hand sanitizer, this is basically a game changer for them. And they only had basically less than a week's supply left. And so they asked us to if there's a way that we could do this. And I think that the the aspects of this meeting concerning pivoting, and I think this is a really good example of that, where we would normally have our undergraduate labs be teaming with undergraduate students doing chemistry experiments, but we had to cancel all those due to COVID. So we had this unused infrastructure and pent up energy of our graduate student staff and faculty members that then we could sort of throw at this sort of task. And so one of the things we did was we first looked at how you formulate hand sanitizer, and we went with what the World Health Organization formula that uses isopropyl alcohol. And so in order to make it, obviously you have to procure that. And so I think one of our other speakers mentioned supply chain and how these things were literally drying up. And so we were having a lot of difficulty sourcing this kind of material, because in conversations with the hospital, they said just at KGH alone, they needed 200 liters per week, and to supply the local area, we'd need 300 liters of hand sanitizer a week. And that's not something the chemistry department normally has on hand. So we had to go and source 2,500 liters of alcohol literally within 2 days to start to get this, and put this all on our departmental credit card, because there was no other method to do this on a Friday afternoon. And we're able to eventually source this. And then eventually, while we were waiting for this to arrive, then we had to start to think about all the different aspects of how we would actually deliver this to them. What would the container look like? How do we get Health Canada approval? What sorts of quality assurance tests do we do? Even how do we get it from our chemistry building to Kingston General Hospital down the street? And so it was quite fascinating to see how all these different groups came together to make this project happen. And as of, I guess this week, we've supplied well over 2,000 liters to the hospital. We still have a bunch on hand, and we're using that to supply the university and also Providence Healthcare in town.
Nice. And so, Emily, is Emily going to say a few words? Okay.
Yeah, I think Richard did a good overview of that part. I think the next thing we wanted to talk about was the collaborators. I think Richard might know a little more about the collaborators who were involved, and then I'll talk more about how we make it.
Yeah, you're the expert on the formulation side for sure. Yeah. So I think that alludes, I think, to the next question we're going to go to, Jim, about what teams were involved. Is that right?
Yes, it'd be great to understand. It seems like each of these projects involves networks and collaborators and connections and collaborations. We'd love to hear what types of groups and expertise you brought to this project.
Yeah, and it was absolutely astounding how many people wanted to jump to help us. In fact, we had to sort of say no to individuals at the start because we just had so many people that were wanting to contribute. But at the end of the day, it ended up being a collaboration with the university, local industry, and the health authority that actually made this happen. So we had TriArt within Kingston. This was a company that I didn't even know existed until this. They were the ones who actually provided and made specialized hand sanitizer bottles. And I think Emily's going to talk about that in a little bit.
Here,
showing the prop now. Yeah.
Final product.
There's the product. Nice.
Very good. And the other thing that was interesting was that we didn't just formulate it within the Department of Chemistry. We had two partner sites, one with chemical engineering and one at Green Center Canada at Innovation Park. We did this for a couple different reasons, because everybody obviously wanted to help, but we also thought that if we had a site that was potentially contaminated that we needed to shut down, then we could use one or both of the other sites to make up that decrease in volume. And so Brian Amsden, chemical engineering, was very, very helpful. Dino Luricchio at KGH was the person who actually coordinated the whole thing. And Amy Holland at Green Center was absolutely essential in our formulations testing. And the last one I'll say is there's a lot of safety protocols that have to be in place, and the Environmental Health and Safety Department at Queen's was fantastic, in particular Sheila Mirsky.
Yeah, very much so. In creating some of these projects that are used in the healthcare system, there's a considerable amount of regulatory considerations that you need to navigate and understand. And I think that was causing some challenges for volunteers that wanted to lean in and create some projects. Sounds like you've successfully navigated that landscape. Emily, so could you tell us how you actually make the sanitizer that's pharmaceutical grade and follows Health Canada regulations?
Yeah, so as Richard has already mentioned, the World Health Organization has set out essentially 2 formulas that are deemed safe and effective for use. So effective against killing the virus, but also safe for the person actually applying it. So what we had to do to make it pharmaceutical grade or safe for healthcare workers is, one, you need to use chemicals of very high purity. So we can buy those from our supplier that have high purity with no contaminants. And the second was developing the protocol of how we actually prepare it with all the safety measures, not only just our regular lab safety, but also considering the COVID restrictions as well. And having the quality control checks in place as well to make sure the products that we are going out between the 3 different sites were all the same and at the appropriate levels. So a few of the key things in that protocol that we needed to make sure we had was we would have a buddy system. So we worked in pairs. One person was actually doing the mixing and the other person would be there observing and checking the work. So making sure if you added a liter of isopropanol, that those numbers matched. And another key thing at the end is we would actually test once it was mixed completely, we would test the alcohol level and peroxide levels, again, to make sure that they are at the safe and effective guidelines. And again, this would be checked between the 2 people. And then the kind of final step that we did to ensure that this was going to be a very high quality product was we actually, once it was made, we would leave it for 3 days to ensure that the container itself was sterilized before we then transported it to the hospitals or its end location. And then, of course, so adapting for COVID, as chemists, we're used to working in labs and following strict protocols and making sure the quality is good. But we had the challenge of when we got back into lab, you couldn't be 6 feet beside your partner. And we had to wear masks, so extra protective equipment. And so getting over checking each value, it wasn't a matter of both people are there looking at the scale. One person would read off the number and then would have to step away, and the other person would come verify, and then so on. So that was just an extra little adjustment that we had to make, and I think everyone was able to handle it after we got going. And also just the amount of people we could have in the lab at a time, so you can only have a maximum of 5 people together at that time. So I think that was the important thing too about having the different collaborators is we could have multiple sites with multiple people working to really make sure we were able to get the quantity out that they needed, because 300 liters of hand sanitizer is quite a bit for a small group of people to work on. So I'll just show maybe the bottle again. So this is the bottles so we were making 3 liters at a time. So if you can imagine, we need 100 bottles a week essentially to meet that quota.
Oh. And is that an example of the bottle that the local partner provided?
It is. Yeah.
It is. Okay, nice.
And it had to be translated in both official languages as well, as we found out.
Okay. So Emily, I have one follow-up question for you. As a graduate student, I can't imagine you had any thoughts this would be your backdrop or frame of reference as you're pursuing graduate studies. Give us some insights that you might have learned from this process that you might not have otherwise had for not being involved in the project.
I think one thing that I learned was how quickly we can adapt and how adaptable our skills are. So in the lab, I would never think I would be making hand sanitizer, but I have all the skills that I've learned from my degree to be able to apply it to this for the good of our society. I think that was a really important thing for me that I learned through the process.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing information on that project too. Thank you to both Emily and Richard. So now we'll move to, I guess, a group discussion or questions that any of the panelists can answer. Looking at our Q, just one second to look at our Q&A. We have one question on the chat board and a couple other follow-up questions to ask. One question right out of the gate would be to Richard and Emily. Do you have plans to continue to produce your hand sanitizer into the future, or will this be somewhat of a temporary measure?
Want me to answer that, Emily, or you want to do it?
I can answer what I think, and then maybe you can verify. I think so right now production has actually been paused because we have filled all of the bottles that we currently have. But I think, and since the situation in Kingston, our amount of cases are relatively low, I think we will continue as long as they need us to.
Mm-hmm.
I think kind of, as long as the need is there, I think we will be able to continue to do it.
Yeah, I think we always thought of it as a stopgap measure, given that I guess the regular supply chain couldn't supply enough, and I think that has changed, and people are ramping that up. So we saw a dire need at that point, but we don't want to be in that business for the long term.
Yep. So let me ask a general question and ask any one of our panelists to answer. And the question is, what advice would you have for others, whether they're researchers, students, or community members, professionals, looking to pivot their work to help confront a challenge coming from COVID-19? Any words of advice?
I'm happy to, pardon me, to say a few words. My experience was, and my advice would be that this is something that you really cannot do alone. You need to establish connections. Pardon me. For us, getting the support of the universities, getting the support of the national labs, building those connections, and it's kind of an iterative procedure. I don't use shampoo, but I understand rinse, lather, and repeat. And it's really very much the same thing, that we have to be sort of incrementally building your credibility by making the connections, getting other people excited about the project, getting all the necessary expertise, getting the backing of major sort of infrastructures like the universities and the labs was absolutely critical. But you start at zero and you work your way up to that.
Excellent. Leslie, Emily, or Richard, any thoughts to jump in on that question?
I would also like to add something.
Please.
It's something I actually heard a lot, and an advice I'll give others is not to think that what you're doing is too small, because oftentimes we feel like our project is whatever I'm thinking is too small, so there's no point in doing that. But at the end of the day, all what matters is the impact that you create. So whether it's huge, whether it's the next big thing, or whether it's the small, like the smallest thing on earth, just think about the end goal instead of really focusing on like the size of it.
Thank you, Leslie. Great advice. Emily or Richard, any thoughts on this question?
I think it's just important that when you're sitting at home and you have time on your hands to try and do something. And I think that kind of goes along with what Leslie was saying, that small acts add up to be very large acts. And so I think that's a really important aspect.
Okay. Looking at the Q&A chat, we have a couple of questions coming in. One for Tony. I think you referenced this in your talk, Tony, but mentioning the 10,000 ventilators, the question was, how's the team doing on this production-wise?
Well, I believe we're at 4.
For total?
4 total, yeah. So, you know, the sequence of events is that you build the validation test units that are then used as part of the certification process. And once you have the Health Canada certification, in our case, then that basically gives you the green light to go ahead with mass production. So the supply chain and everything are all lined up to be able to start in about 2 weeks with, the first week is only going to be something like 200 ventilators, but then it will ramp up to, as I mentioned, about 1,000 ventilators a week. But there's a process to go through to get there, and we're just at we have real ventilators, so that's a big and major step. But now there's a couple weeks of duress as we get it through all of its testing and then the final certification before we launch. So we're on the verge.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is for Leslie. You had mentioned that there can be a fair bit of misinformation around COVID-19. The question is, can you give us some more specifics of the type of information you're including with the distribution of the soap?
So some of the information that we include is mostly very basic ways of protecting yourself, like social distancing, as I mentioned, and hand washing. And we also try to kind of bust some of the myths, like, because there's a lot of people thinking if I wear a mask, I'm automatically protected. But at the end of the day, they also wear the mask, but still mingle around with so many people, be in so many crowded places. So there's a lot of busting myths that go along with that. And yeah, that's mostly it. But the main kind of information that we share is about how can you protect yourself, mostly.
Right.
And avoid infecting others.
Do you provide some details on specific instruction for hand washing, like how to rub your hands together and how long you should be washing your hands and things like that?
Yes, actually, there's actually like a piece of information that was even created in Cameroon, because also what we do is we try to basically share Cameroonian-made information. So there was one that was made in different Cameroonian languages, showing people how to wash your hand, for how long, and which way. So yeah, those kind of information too.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. We talked a little bit about this when we spoke with each of you. But if you can think of any other examples that as a key lesson or a key learning from each of the projects, maybe in general terms, I think we'll round out the session with this last question if any of the panelists have any additional thoughts on that topic or question.
Well, certainly we had to pivot our completely our way of thinking. And that was a bit of a struggle. As astroparticle physicists building large projects, we build one. And if something goes wrong with it, of course, there's a lot of engineering controls and tests along the way. But if something goes wrong, you fix it and continue. It's a completely different thing when you're building 10,000 of something and you no longer have control of them once they're out in the field. So you have to know that they won't fail before you send them out, basically. So the way that you approach quality control, software management, and so on was all quite foreign to the way we normally do things. So that was a major pivot. And again, by getting all the experts around the table, we were able to do that. We certainly, bringing in people, for example, from the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. That's the way they operate all the time. So that was great. And I would say the other lesson perhaps that I learned was just the outpouring of support from the community was absolutely fabulous. I know that there were entrepreneurs all across the country trying to develop things. Not all of them could be successful, and I think we owe a vote of gratitude to all those people that stepped up, did what they could, and contributed in their own ways.
Good. Are there panelists, any thoughts on that question?
I also wanted to share, I feel like there's a common theme that I've been hearing throughout this discussion, and it's about the adaptability. Because as Emily mentioned, when they wanted to start the hand sanitizer, she just used a knowledge she knew already, but used in a different context. So really being adaptable, and I guess for Tony as well, doing it online and Zoom and everything. So really I'm seeing that adaptability, which I think it's really great, and I do appreciate that a lot. So that's my main takeaway, I would say.
Good, thank you. We have another question in the chat, and I think this may end up being our last question, and it's a bit of a broader philosophical question. But to our panelists, what do you think Canada's legacy for its research response to COVID-19 will be?
Well, I don't always want to be first, but I would say that people, at least in the spheres that I have been interacting in, will recognize Canada as having stepped up and having taken leadership, and in many ways facilitated discussions that were awkward in other countries, perhaps, to take leadership. Canada was able to take that leadership. So on the projects that I've worked on and a few others that I am aware of, the ability to maneuver in Canada and to have open discussions and so on meant we were able to take leadership and roles that I think will be recognized in the long term.
I think to build on what Tony's saying, maybe not so broad as like within Canada itself. I know when we started the hand sanitizer project and word got out that we were doing that, the media and everybody wanted to approach us and wanted to hear what we were doing. And I think that's going to be very good for the communities to see the type of research, what we're doing in response to these types of events, to show the importance of what researchers can do.
And I think it also led to, the appreciation that, the skills that we are developing in the universities with our students and postdocs and the research that we do is adaptable, and the national labs and scientists and engineers can pivot and provide really valuable assets to the country as we go forward.
Yeah, and I think that I would classify Canada as punching above its weight. Certainly, if you look at us in terms of population, we aren't obviously the largest country in the world, but I think we contribute well beyond our allotment in terms of scientific progress. And I think this is a really good example when you align all the intellectual horsepower that we have across the country, we can really do some cool things.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll leave it there looking at the time. First, let me say thank you to all our panelists for taking the time to share your stories with us. Much appreciated. Thank you to everybody online for listening and participating. As I said at the beginning, I was really awestruck at the outpouring of interest in trying to support and thank our frontline workers, healthcare and other groups on the front lines. And I think really we've seen teams rally together, working remotely to pivot using teamwork and network effects and scientific excellence in Canada to support a lot of the issues that have cropped up with COVID-19. And as I say at the beginning, I wish we had time to showcase all of the projects. We had 3 here, but a big thank you to anybody in the Queen's community that has lent a hand in any way, shape, or form, because for the ones we see, there's many that unfortunately don't get recognized as much as we would like to see them recognized. So that would be, I guess, my final comments on this session. And I again appreciated the opportunity to have a chance to moderate this session. And in closing off the event, I guess I'd hand it back to Karen Bertrand to close off the session.
All right. Thanks very much, Jim. And please let me extend a personal thank you to all of our panelists, to you, Tony, Leslie, Emily, and Richard. We sincerely thank you for your words today. If I may, Tony, quote you all stepped up, and your stories are all clearly examples of how you pivoted from what was already very important work that you were already engaged in, and you continued to pivot even through the new endeavors you found yourself working on, either through adapting to technology or adapting, Emily, to the physical distancing requirements that you then had to contend with. So thank you very much, and thank you sincerely for sharing your stories with us. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions today. We truly did appreciate your engagement. And a reminder that a recording of the event will be available in a couple of days to view online at queensu.ca/alumni. Jim, you mentioned we wanted to be able to share more stories, and we will do that. We're going to continue the Conversations Confronting COVID-19 series in the coming months, and we will be introducing you to more work of members of the Queen's research community. Beginning next month in July, our next session will be talking about aging, lessons learned about Canada's aging population and long-term care. We're going to continue providing you lots of different virtual programming opportunities, and we hope that you will continue to join us until we can meet again in person. Once the webinar does end, you will be redirected to a survey where you can share your feedback on this particular webinar, and this was very helpful as we start to shape our programming for this series going forward. So we do hope that people will take the time to fill in that survey, please. And then finally, in closing, I would just like to say on behalf of Jim and all of our panelists, thank you very much for joining us this morning.